Okay, everyone?
Hi, I am. I'm Patricia. Hi, Bob. Nice to meet you.
Well, everybody, thank you very much for coming today. We are very excited to have with us Patricia Cochran. The Arctic is playing an increasingly important role on the planet and impacts our policy discussions on a wide range of issues. At the Energy Forum, we are closely watching developments in Alaska's oil and gas industry. We have Shell about to begin possibly drilling offshore this summer. And there are so many issues at play with global warming, with the melting, changes in international shipping and security in the far north, the challenge of economic development and employment in the far north, and of course, the challenge of climate change and how it will affect Indigenous communities. So our speaker today, Patricia Cochran, has been at the forefront of almost all of these issues. She has devoted her life to helping Indigenous communities contend with the dramatic changes from resource extraction and climate change. These communities desire to protect their way of life, but there's also the benefit that comes to the state of Alaska from oil production, and that has to be taken into account. This afternoon we had a terrific lunch with Patricia. She talked a little bit about this sort of love-hate relationship between the local community and oil exploration. And that is something that has been of interest to us. I have some students here from our class this year. Our class on integrated approaches to sustainable development has been studying Alaska, and sustainability in Alaska is our theme, and Patricia will be talking to the class tomorrow evening. We're sorry that our other instructor, there are two other Rice professors who are involved with this class, and I'm afraid to say that both are in the hospital today. And so one of them is Ronald Sass, who some of you might know is the fellow for climate studies here at the Baker Institute and a professor of ecology and biology at Rice. And the other one, Dr. Robert Harris, is a very good friend who's teaching the class with me, is a climate scientist who many of you know from the Houston Area Research Center, previously with Texas A&M and other university backgrounds. So they both sent along their best wishes and apologies that they couldn't be here with us this afternoon. They are both undergoing surgery this week. So my fingers are crossed for speedy, easy process for them. Sometimes when we talk about sustainability in some place that for us here in Houston seems very far away, sometimes we're talking about Africa, sometimes we're talking about Latin America, and even here for some of us, Alaska seems very far away, even though it's in the United States. But I think that Patricia is really going to explain to us how the thinning sea ice in the far north relates to a wide range of climate issues and environmental issues really around the globe, from melting glaciers in the Andes and the Himalayas to the flooding of low-lying island states, and many of the economic and environmental challenges the Arctic region faces result from activities that have taken place here in the South. So we really need to connect the dots and thinking together about, not just what's happening in the North or what's happening in the South, but how these two things interrelate and affect us as a global community. Patricia is the executive director of the Alaskan Native Science Commission. That is an organization that brings together research and science in partnership with Alaskan Native communities. She has served as the chair of the 2009 Indigenous People Global Summit on Climate Change and is co-chair of the Indigenous People Global Network on Climate Change. She was talking to us a little bit about those activities at lunch. I'm sure we're all going to be interested in hearing a little bit about that. She is the past chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, an international organization representing 160,000 Inuit of Alaska, Canada, Russia, and Greenland, and former chair of the Indigenous Peoples Secretariat to the 8-Nation Arctic Council. Cochran has also served as principal and co-principal investigator on numerous research projects throughout the Arctic and has written numerous articles and publications. She appears internationally on very important programs reporting on climate change and Indigenous issues, and we are delighted to have her here to speak with us today.
Thank you. I'm going to try to set myself up so I can stand and everyone can see me and hear me. Yes? Good. Okay. First of all, thank you, Amy, and thanks to everyone for inviting me to come to this beautiful place. It's lovely here, although a bit warmer than what I'm accustomed to. When I left home yesterday, we had just finished with a major snowstorm, where in Anchorage, Alaska, we've had a record-breaking snowfall for this year. More, or actually forever, the largest snowfall we've ever seen. I had about 10 feet in my backyard. And so I'll tell you that it's really lovely to be outside of the snowfall for just a bit. So thank you very much for the invitation. If I could, please allow me just a couple of minutes to begin in my own way, in my traditional way, as I've been taught by my elders to do everything in the right way. That is, first of all, to acknowledge the Indigenous people of this land, and to thank the people of Texas, to thank all of you for inviting me here and for allowing me to speak on your lands. I give thanks to the Creator for this beautiful day that has been given to all of us. I thank and honor all of my elders who are here with us today. And I remember and honor all of our ancestors who have come before us. My name in English is Patricia, but that's really not who I am. My name, that was a name given to me by people outside my own community who figured we all had to have proper English names. I was born and raised in Nome, Alaska, way up in the northwestern part of the state. And I hate to tell you this, even from Nome, which is the closest area to Russia, you still can't see Alaska from there. So, or you can't see Russia from there. So that's, just to put that away. You actually can see Russia from the Diomede Islands. But that's about the only place in Alaska that's going to happen. I was given the name Sikuana, and that's the name that people in my community know me by. It's the name given to me by my mom and by my aunties. It was a name of a young girl who died very early in her life, and I was given the responsibility and the honor of living her life as well as my own. So for us, our traditional names are really important and really significant to the human beings that we become. And that's why we try to share with people when we go to various places a bit about who we are and our history. Normally, when I would go and do a meeting with other people, I would really like to know each and every one of you. But that would take the entire session just to go around and say hello to everyone. So I'm sorry if I didn't make it around to say hi, but I'll try to do that at the end. Thank you again for inviting me. And I'm going to cover a bunch of different issues tonight, and a whole lot more in the 2-hour lecture that I'm going to, classroom I'm going to do tomorrow night. There are so many issues that are happening in the Arctic, so many things that are going on now, that I hope that you will be ready with questions and feel free to stop and ask questions anywhere through this. I've got a number of slides that I'm going through. One of the ways that I've been taught in my community is that anyone who has to speak from a piece of paper shouldn't be speaking. And that was our elders' way of teaching us to speak from the heart, to remember all of the things that we have learned, and to really listen. So for us, these were life lessons and the ways that we were taught by our elders in our communities. So I tried to do some pictures just to sort of engage people and to remind me of the things that I want to talk about. So in front of you, you have my name and also the website for my organization. The Alaska Native Science Commission is almost 20 years old. We were started originally in the early 90s and were started as a project of the University of Alaska. It was in response to all of our communities, which there are lots and lots of communities in Alaska and a lot of Native people there. We call ourselves Native people. I'm a Nupyak, and that's my self-identification. Indigenous is sort of a term that we've come to use pretty loosely. And people identify us as Indigenous people, but if you ask us, I would tell you that I am a Nupyak, and that's who I am. But we use the term Native in Alaska very frequently to identify our large group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Our Science Commission, as I said, has been around for a while. We've been working with our communities to engage them with researchers so that people know what's going on in their communities. There aren't always hundreds of researchers coming in and out, and folks never know what's going on. So this is our way to showcase and to put our issues on the table to teach people a little bit about Native science, about the science and knowledge, the traditional knowledge that comes from our communities. Having lived for centuries in some of the most extreme environments in the world, we've built up a pretty good knowledge base ourselves of how to survive in really difficult conditions. So part of what we bring to the table is our intimate knowledge of working in the lands and understanding all of the land and environment around us. So with that, let me see if I can get to my first slide. Sorry, I'm used to sort of walking around to do this, so I'm going to try to stay stationary. Yes?
On the previous slide, I thought the graphic was fascinating. Maybe you had an interesting story behind it.
There is. You can see it has a lot of meaning to it, and yeah, there was a big reason in putting that together. The symbolism is there are all the elements: earth, air, water, and fire. All the directions, north, east, south, and west. They're represented by all the colors and by all of the four quadrants. The circles represent the creator, the earth, and the human being. And so those were just, and of course the North Star, where we reside. But there's actually a whole story and legend that goes along with that, which is on the website if you'd care to look at that. So, you know, when we are in Alaska, we kind of get a different view of the world. This is sort of the way we see things, from a real top-down perspective, because we live at the top of the planet. And so for us, it's a little different view. All of our neighbors are really the people around us in the north, the circumpolar north. Those are the communities that we have been working with for a very long period of time and have really strong relationships. Can I tell you one of my strongest pet peeves is every time I look at any news program or show anywhere in the world, it always shows a picture of the continental United States, and then Alaska is somewhere off the coast of Mexico usually. You know, and that's where it's always stuck in this little box here. Nobody knows where Alaska is because people think it's off the coast of Mexico along with Hawaii somewhere. So if you have people that could help us to fix that map, would be really happy if we could actually show where Alaska and Hawaii truly are. So for us, you can see that we live around the Arctic Ocean, the Arctic Circle, and all of the communities up north. Well, there are a lot of things happening in the Arctic Ocean. I know that you have all heard about the opening of the waters, the Arctic waters. The loss of the sea ice there is tremendous. We're seeing issues and more things that are going on in the Arctic than we've ever seen before, and expect more of it to happen. We've had already some instances because of the ice-free, year-round ice-free conditions, where just last year in Barrow, way up there in the north, they woke up to have a cruise ship of 400 Germans off of their coastline one morning who had just come into the territory. Coast Guard didn't know they were there. None of the people who should have known knew that they were coming, and they just arrived. So we're already beginning to see some of these kinds of movements happening within our areas. We know more and more of that is going to happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about sea ice as we go through some other slides, but just to sort of get you accustomed to the area. These are some of the issues that I'm going to cover in tonight's presentation. Talk a little bit about erosion, what's happening to many of our communities there, permafrost, the loss of sea ice, storms, glaciers retreating, increased fires, increased temperatures, some new and invasive species, food security, which is a very important issue to us and to many of our communities who still live off of the land. That in many of our places, 80 or 90% of their food is outside their front door. I tell people that's our Safeway store. That's where we go shopping, is when you open your front door. That's our Safeway. And again, of course, the open Arctic waters. You can see some of the pictures here. We can get to this one here. This doesn't look good. These are the kinds of things that people in our community, again, who are reliant upon the critters that you see in the ocean to sustain their communities, their lives, and their cultures. So we're seeing more and more of these kinds of conditions where our hunters simply are not able to travel out safely. We're losing more and more people every year. That our hunters go out hunting or fishing or whaling and just don't come back. A lot of our rivers in particular, where people use their snow machines, they disappear into the rivers that used to be safe to travel on, or ice that used to be safe to travel on. That simply is not safe anymore. The changes are happening so rapidly that even our centuries of knowledge of being able to read and predict the weather has become much more difficult for those hunters who have those skills and have been able to rely on those skills for a long time. We're just not able to read the weather patterns as well as we were in the past because they're changing so rapidly in so many different directions. So this is just one example of the kinds of conditions that we're going through. This is a friend of mine. You can't see, but he's sitting on top of his snow machine, which was pulling one of his sleds, waiting for a rescue. Again, just to give you a small sampling of the kinds of experiences that our hunters are going through now. It's not a pretty picture. Let me talk about some of the permafrost. Does everybody know what permafrost is? I'm assuming most folks are aware of permafrost. Well, where we live in Alaska, most all of our communities, most of the state, especially in the north, is permafrost. We're built on permafrost. It's a frozen layer of ice under that is what we build our houses, our airports, all of our infrastructure is built primarily over these permafrost areas. Well, now because all of the temperatures are rising, and by the way, at least 3 degrees Fahrenheit, in some places a 7-degree temperature regime shift in the Arctic, so some extreme changes that we're seeing in our areas. These are some of the pretty visible results. This is a large permafrost melt, thermokarst, that is in one of the large areas, the Selawik River area. You can see what it does to all of the landscape around there. It is literally, everything is just melting away. That means for us that everything that we have built in that permafrost, whether it's our sewer and water systems, whether it is our airports that are built on these, whether it's our homes, any of these structures are literally falling into the crevices of the permafrost. In the north, we've traditionally used ice cellars as one of the ways that we keep our food stored because it was always frozen, and that was our natural refrigerator were these traditional ice cellars. Well, now those ice cellars aren't there anymore either, so that's another issue of looking at food security problems because we can't store our food for longer periods of time because the ice cellars are all melting. This is a tundra fire that's happening along the Noatak River, another area in the interior northwestern area of the state, somewhat near where I was born. Most of you probably, I don't know if you recognize tundra, but tundra is flat land that is where we do a lot of our traditional, that a lot of our traditional foods use. Our traditional food is grown for our caribou, for the moose, for the reindeer. That's what they depend upon, is all of the food that comes from the tundra areas. Because of the changes in, a number of changes that are happening due to climate, warming temperatures, more lightning strikes than we have ever seen before, with the resulting forest fires that are devastating. Just 2 summers ago, we had the largest forest fire that we've ever seen in the Arctic. It burned an area that made up the states of Delaware, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. If you put them all together, that's how much was burned in this one area in Alaska. So a very large area of burn in the Arctic. Now, what happens with tundra fires is, number one, you can see they're pretty far out there, and not a whole lot of way to get to them. There's not a road system going there. And putting them out is almost impossible, because tundra fires can also burn underground, and literally can burn for years underground. You won't even know that they're there. So you might even be having the destruction when you're not aware that it's going on. These are some of the things, again, that you can see that changes everything from the tundra fires, because it changes all of the vegetation in the area. Again, our animals live on the lichen, the moss, all of the things that come from the vegetation of the tundra areas. So for us, this is a real devastating effect, not only for the community, but for our animals as well. Here's another issue that we're seeing. What we call winter icing conditions, where it freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws so many times that it develops this huge layer of ice that is just impossible to get through. That, again, because our animals depend upon the food that's underneath there, they've usually been able to break through, to get down to the moss, the lichen. Can't do that anymore. In Siberia, over the last few years, they've lost more than 1 million reindeer because of these icing conditions. So these, again, are just some of the impacts that are being seen. This is from our fish camps. These are fish racks from my hometown, from Nome, and this is actually one of my uncle's fish camps. You can see one of the ways that we maintain our food is by drying our fish. And it lasts for a long time if it's smoked and dried. Again, one of the reasons we've been able to survive in pretty strong and strange environments, because we've had ways of keeping our food reliable. Well, we've had so much wet weather in the Nome area that this particular summer, none of the fish would dry. It just was never, dry enough. We had rain so much that the fish simply would slide off of the skin. It could not dry, it wouldn't adhere. So these are, again, food security issues because of climate impacts. This is a picture from the interior of Alaska of a community called Huslia. I don't know if you can read that thermometer there, but it reads 107 degrees. So let me tell you, that's not the usual thing. We have had warm temperatures in the interior, in particular in Alaska, but at this time, it stayed this way for more than a 2-week period of time during the summer, and that was really literally unheard of. It was so warm that you can see what one of the results was one of the largest forest fires that brought this whole village almost into being lost. The folks in the area were able to build a trench around their community. They were able to cut back some of the trees and were able to save their village, but it was not without a lot of hard work for them to try to keep this massive burn from happening in their community. Okay, this is a village called Shishmaref. Probably a lot of you have heard about Shishmaref. Shishmaref has become sort of the poster child of climate change in the Arctic. There are times in Shishmaref where we have more reporters than there are people living in the community. So let me tell you, that's one of the interesting things about climate change, that you don't think about that as being a societal impact, but it truly is. When you have so many people coming in, investigating, researching, it changes the dynamics of that entire village and how people can relate to one another. It's pretty hard to even have a conversation in the village store without somebody putting a microphone to your mouth. You know, so it sort of really, it makes things within the community really difficult as well. Just some of the things that you don't really consider as impacts of climate change. But this is a village in Shishmaref where you can see that the storms that are now occurring in our communities are much more severe than they have ever been before. And because we no longer have what is called shore-fast ice that used to build up and stuck along the shoreline all winter long, that kept those storms from encroaching onto our lands. Well, that ice barrier is no longer there. So the frequency of the storms and the crazy volatile storms that we have now are creating these conditions in Alaska of severe erosion. And I mean unbelievable erosion. 85% of our communities in Alaska are coastal communities. 85%. And when you look at a thought of that many villages and communities going through exactly what's happening here in Shishmaref and now in many places around the state, you can begin to understand some of the problems that we're seeing. Right now that there are 7 villages that look just like this. A couple of them, Shishmaref being one of them, Newtok being another, that are already in the process of moving their communities because they have nowhere else to go. They have to move further. They have to move further inland. We have another 31 communities that are in imminent danger within the next decade of going through this same kind of issues. So you can see that for us, these are really, these are true losses, and these are something that we have shoved in our face every day. We have to learn to live with these. What do? The unfortunate thing is that, you know, nobody wants to write a check of $500 million to move a village of 200 people. I mean, that goes without saying. You know, there's the feds aren't going to bail us out. So we're really trying to figure out what in the world are we going to do? How do we, as communities that have been there for centuries, how do we continue to live? This particular community has been there for 8,000 years. So people don't want to up and leave. This is home. This is where they've always been. So we're trying to figure out now how we are going to be able to maintain ourselves, maintain our own communities, our own lifestyles. So these are just some of the issues that we're grappling with. And in our class tomorrow, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the adaptation strategies that we're looking at. Sorry, it's just too much to sort of cover all in one night. But if you really want to know, come to the class tomorrow. This is my hometown. This is Nome. And this is the front street of Nome. My brother's house used to be right on this side of that picture. Nome has been pretty fortunate in that quite a number of years ago they built a rock seawall that's all the way across the front part of Nome. So it has mostly kept the front street from being totally decimated by these storms. But they're getting more and more intense, and we're seeing more of them. We used to call these 200-year storms because they came about every 200 years. Then they started calling them 100-year storms, and then 50-year storms. I've seen this 5 times in my lifetime. Yeah, I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. So you can tell that these are pretty severe conditions that we're experiencing. They've tried a number of different things. The Army Corps of Engineers has been working with all of our villages and communities over the last number of years, trying to find ways to help that erosion problem. They've tried riprap, which is a metal grating that they use to beef up the shoreline. They've tried moving in rocks. They've tried a number of different things. Unfortunately, haven't worked. The riprap was all gone in the very first storm that came through the community. It's just, so far we haven't found anything that works. So let me move on to a little bit about these connections now between what's happening in the Arctic and what's happening throughout the rest of the planet. A couple of years ago, I hosted and organized the first ever Indigenous Peoples Global Summit on climate change, bringing in more than 400 Indigenous people from all across the planet to talk about climate change and to see what was happening, how we could begin to work together more effectively as Indigenous people of the world. And we now have a network, a global network, that meets several times a year, and we work within a whole structure from Africa to the Arctic. So we're trying to keep our people together. So here's a picture of Shishmaref and a picture of the Seychelles. One of the things that I found that's really effective is when the ambassador from the Seychelles is at the United Nations, when he says, "Why the heck should I care about what's going on in the Arctic?" It makes a much stronger point coming from the ambassador of the Seychelles than from me. And then people begin to understand that this isn't just happening in one location, that this really is an issue that impacts us as a planet, as a humankind. So these are just, again, some of the pictures. You can see in the Seychelles, for instance, they're having such problems with water that they have desal plants, desalination plants that are operating everywhere in the Seychelles, just trying to create enough water so that they have water supply available to their communities.
Has something happened to the Seychelles freshwater supply?
Yeah, I mostly, again, for a couple of things. It's the warmer temperatures and just simply losing all of the water supply that's there because of the warmer temperatures. The warmer oceans, everything around them is impacting their water system, their water supply. So now they're taking their seawater, their salt water, and trying to make it into drinkable water. So that's how they're dealing with it. Again, so you can see Nome in Norway. Yeah, does that look like home?
It does.
A lot of storms. You know, people are seeing the same kinds of issues across the Arctic. The Sami in Sweden and Norway, work with them very closely. They're having the same issues with their reindeer herds. They're having the same issues of extreme temperature changes, environmental and storm changes. So you can see again that things are quite similar. The huge fire that we had in Huslia and what has been happening in the Amazon. For different reasons, obviously, but we're still all experiencing the same kinds of forest issues, of loss of lands, of burning of lands, of development encroaching in the indigenous lands. So these are again some of the things that are very similar and that we work purposely together on. In Alaska, you saw what was happening with our food, and in Africa. You can see that the drought situations that are there, this photo came from one of my friends who lives in Kenya, and he says this is the kind of thing that they see every day, that their water supply there, they have lost so much water. Their drought conditions are so severe that they're literally losing all of their animals. They're losing, people are having to pack water from miles and miles and miles away to bring water into their villages. So again, we're trying to find ways that we can make a stronger statement on a worldwide platform by showcasing our issues as being global issues and not just individual. This is a picture. Anybody know what this is? Methane. Yes. Oops, wait, let me go back to that. One of the things that people are just now beginning to pick up on. Methane is one of those nasty things that comes out of the ground, especially when the permafrost melts. And we're having such permafrost melting in the Arctic that one of the researchers in Siberia, I think it was just last year, had this whole YouTube video going on where she was lighting a match over a methane release in Siberia, and it just methane is everywhere. That is going to become one of our critical issues that is just now beginning to get on the radar of researchers and politicians in the Arctic.
And Patricia, is this from the melting of hydrates, or from that's the source?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let me talk a little bit about, so what are we doing? So what, I told you all of the terrible things that are going on. How in the heck are we going to live? What can we do? How can we keep ourselves together? These are some of the things that we're trying to do in education, in communicating, in getting our message out to people. Number one, I live my life on the road, and I tell you that truthfully. That to me, this is a mission that I'm on, to really educate and to promote the knowledge of what is going on this planet to as many people on this planet as I can. I've been to more than 80 countries. I have traveled from one end of the globe to the other. I have lectured at so many places I can't begin to tell you, just to sort of get this story, get the knowledge out there. One of the things that we've done in Alaska is that we've been working for the last 5 years with Boston Public Television. Everybody knows the people who brought us Sesame Street, okay? Because they're a really effective educational tool. And we wanted to find a way that we could start bringing some of this information, some of the knowledge that comes from our area to a larger stage. So we've been working with them and now have put together on their Teachers Domain website. This is a website that trains teachers all across the planet. So we have an entire section now on Alaska Native perspectives on earth and climate. We've looked at earth, air, water, fire. We've looked at all of the things that I've talked to you about. We have our native scientists who are part of the video project of this. We've tried to include science lessons that come from our own traditional teachings. People were asking me about my kuspak, which is what this is. It's what we call our summer parka. And there's little understanding other than it looks really nice, and everybody always wants to have one of these. I'm going to remember to bring a bunch of them on the road with me. That would be a really good marketing tool. I could sell these, I know. Everybody wonders about why we have all of these things the way that we do. This is an entire lesson plan in itself, so we use this as a teaching tool. The patterns that we use in all of our geometric patterns teaches math, it teaches science, it teaches all the kinds of things our kids need to learn. It teaches about hunting because we use fur. It teaches storytelling because each of these articles has a story that comes with it. So we try to use our own ways of knowing, learning, and teaching so that our kids not only learn about their culture, but really learn about science as well, and from a Western as well as a Native perspective. So that's what we've tried to build into this. The good thing is that this website is used all over the world now. I have folks in Africa who tell me that their teachers are using this, are now starting to model their own kind of training program to teach their ways of knowing, learning, and teaching from their perspective. So we're really excited about this. This is a commission that I worked on that ended just last year, the Aspen Institute. I think probably many of you have heard of. They had a commission on Arctic climate change, and I, along with a number of other people, including the Prince of Monaco, were fortunate to be members of this really great group. We put together a complete report on Arctic climate change. That's on the website for Aspen Institute, and I hope you'll get a chance to look at that. But a really interesting group of people, sort of from a very wide background and perspectives, from CH2M Hill, from Lindblad Expeditions, from Shell, so it sort of gave a really interesting dynamics and a whole lot of wild conversations that we had along the way. I hope you get a chance to take a look at that. The Arctic Alliance is a network of NGOs, very interesting group. most of you know that, that Indigenous organizations haven't always been on the most friendly of terms with environmental organizations. We've had a pretty long-standing feud going on with Greenpeace with one of the instances. But we have decided that it's in our interests to really begin to work with environmental non-NGOs and to work with other organizations that really can help us to spread the message. So one of the ways we did this was to form this group called the Arctic Alliance. And there are people and NGOs that are working together all over the Arctic, now trying to work more effectively together. One of the great things that we've put together is this tool called the Arctic Monitor. If you want to find out what's going on in the Arctic, it's a website that you can go to that gathers all of the Arctic information, resources, videos, all kinds of things that are available in the public domain. You can go to one website and find it all there at the Arctic Monitor. We're working on a project now that we're just trying to get funded, looking at doing a community-based carbon assessment. Carbon is a huge issue in the Arctic and is going to become more of an issue. Not only do we get a lot of carbon that comes in transboundary from plants and other manufacturing from China, from Russia, from other places. We get a lot of transboundary contaminants and pollution. But because of our gas prices, our oil prices are outrageous now. The chairman of my board is an elder who lives in Yakutat. She had to move into Anchorage because she simply couldn't afford the price to keep her house warm anymore. It was over $1,000 a month just to heat her home. And it's just that people aren't able to do that anymore. You can't pay for those kinds of costs. In Nome, the average price of gasoline now for unleaded is over $10. So you can see that people there, there's some of the reasons that lots of our kids are now going back to using dog teams instead of snow machines for a number of really good reasons, because dogs just require you to feed them and take care of them. And we still have a fairly healthy fish population, so we're able to do that. And most importantly, our dogs will tell you when the ice is not safe to go on. A snow machine does not tell you that. So there are some really good reasons that we're looking at going back to using some of our traditional practices. But the point was that we're going to beginning to use more fire, more coal, because that's what we have in abundance there. More wood. All of these things are going to increase our carbon issues as well. So we want to try to take a look at that before it gets really worse, much worse. Another one of my favorite groups that I belong to is a project of the United Nations. This is called the Many Strong Voices Campaign. This one has been around for almost 7 years now, and it's an alliance between the Arctic and the small island developing states. And I told you the reason why we really wanted to come together and begin to work effectively. Some of the reasons that we've got the projects going on now is because of this particular alliance. We've built some very strong partnerships in working with people from the Maldives, from the Seychelles, from Belize, from the Caribbean, from all of these various areas that are our partners now. We've met in each other's communities. We've seen the issues that we are all facing. So this again is one of the ways that we're working. I don't know if any of you are in the recent United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. COP17 just recently held at the end of last year in Durban in South Africa. One of the things that we have created as part of the UN, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, is a group called the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change. This is our response to working within the United Nations. So we are trying to cover our bases politically in as many different ways as we can. We're getting ready for Rio 20. That's coming up, the 20th anniversary of the Rio meeting, where all of these environmental issues really came to the forefront, and that's going to be held in June in Rio. So that's our next target. Again, I told you that we have created now our Indigenous Peoples Global Network on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. We have our secretariat that's located in the Philippines. I serve as the Northern Co-Chair, and Victoria Tauli Corpus is the Southern Co-Chair. She is from the Philippines. Again, we have a very strong organization that works really well together. This is a bit of the project that I was telling you about just a few minutes ago that my organization has literally just started. It's we've just finished our first round of meetings with our communities, trying to figure out, so what do we do? How do we really promote self-reliance? How do we promote our own abilities to continue to live in the ways we choose to live? And so we're working now with our villages to help identify some priority areas that we can work with them on. We've gotten our university system to agree to work with them in partnership on a number of these projects, including like our cold climate housing center, which develops some of the best models for cold climate houses in the world. So they've agreed to work with our communities in developing some partnerships. I've actually met with the folks in Austin a couple of times looking at the energy efficient ways that they're building their infrastructure for the communities in Austin, where many people are living sort of in pods of more energy efficient domains, where they have their energy systems, their heating, their light sources, their sewer and water in a pod area that more people can sustain more freely from. So those are some of the things that we're looking at as well. So this is really what it's all about. For us, it's trying to figure out how we maintain the wisdom of our elders with the needs of our generations to come. And that does it for my lecture to you, and I will be really delighted to answer any questions you might have. Yeah.
I haven't heard anything mentioned about what kind of medical care is available there. Please tell us. I haven't heard it mentioned. They surely are equipped some way.
Yeah, well, we have great medical care and we have terrible medical care. So let me just give you a broad picture. Yeah, yeah, probably the same everywhere. Alaska is huge. Okay, everybody from Texas knows that. I'm not going to make any bad jokes about the size. Okay, I wasn't going to go there. But it's a huge place, and we range from everything from really Arctic conditions way in the north to almost tropical forests in the southeast. You know, where it's lush forest lands and the interior. So it's sort of a really wide variety of conditions and peoples. We've got terrible third world conditions in some of the most remote areas where there's no access other than air. The only way you can get into many of these villages is by a plane. There are no road systems. There's no other way to get there. So in those kinds of places, we have community health aides, and that's one of the things that we've tried to do to address the small remote villages, is that we have trained people who live within the village, because I'll tell you, none of our doctors are going to go and spend a winter in Shaktoolik where it's 50, 70 below. They just don't do that. So we've trained community health aides. We have dental technicians who can work, and people who live within the village. So that's there. We also have a really great infrastructure for telemedicine. Our telehealth programs are some of the best in the world. So that even in those remote areas, you can get online and talk with one of the doctors in a major city hospital. Where I live now in Anchorage is a very cosmopolitan city. It's like any other medium-sized city. We've got about 350,000 people in Anchorage. It has everything there. We also have a world-class Alaska Native Medical Center. Truthfully, one of the best in the world. It has some of the best care. It's rated at the top of the list in almost everything, and interestingly, it is run by us. We have the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium that runs our Alaska Native Medical Center. So all the doctors work for the indigenous communities. So it makes the dynamics a little different. We're able to have much more influence on the clients, because we don't have patients in our hospital, we have clients. And they get everything from traditional foods as part of their hospital stay to traditional medicine. So a little bit.
Do you ever get help from organizations in this part of the world, like United when it comes to
Sure. Yeah.
Good.
Of course, and we have actually, one of my friends, Michelle Brown, is a director of United Way in Anchorage. It's a really large organization. So there probably isn't, there's hardly none of those large organizations that aren't part of the Anchorage life.
I'm working on one in Sub-Saharan Africa right now. with
Uh-huh.
United Way.
Yeah, it's a big campaign.
Quite a different climate.
How far into the future are you all planning and looking at? Assuming that these developments will continue, at least for a while,
Yeah.
and you're making some plans in terms of moving villages inland, and are there any sort of longer-term kind of projections? Is there some studies being done as to, well, what are we going to do looking 50 years and so forth ahead?
Well, I can tell you not just 50 years ahead. Again, part of our training and teaching is that we look to the seventh generation.
That's a long one.
That's a bit in the future. And that's really, again, part of the way that we learn is that we are not just dealing with the here and now, but truly looking at generations to come. So we try to make all of our plans with things that will benefit our great
Are there some studies available as to how this is all going?
Tons.
On some of these websites?
There are some of them on the websites. University of Alaska has done a whole lot of studies. They've done some studies on looking at the impacts of moving villages. So there are a number of those things that I can leave you with some websites. Alaska has an Alaska climate change website now that is part of the governor's advisory panel. There's the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium that now has a great website for not only information about all the reports that are available, but also it's the touch to the community, because they're the ones where people in the community, can actually input information as to observations. If they're seeing change in species that they can download, they can put that data into that website so we can keep a handle on traditional knowledge.
Yes, thank you. How closely do you collaborate with the Sami? I mean, you have, in some respects, you have very much in common.
A lot, especially during my as chair of ICC. I spent a lot of time working with my brothers and sisters in Sami, and I am there probably at least a couple of times a year. They come to Alaska pretty frequently, so we have a lot of projects. I work a lot with the European Union, the European Commission. Has been part of their looking at their Arctic agenda.
Are there ways of harnessing this methane that is starting to bubble up, or is it just a pure negative?
I think that's what that's what's going on now, where people are trying to figure out what are we going to do with the release of all the methane. So those are the studies that are ongoing now. I don't know that I'm not aware that there are any remedies in place now, but I know that there are studies now beginning to happen to figure that out.
Are the Russians helping in any way to look at the future?
Absolutely. And again, as a member of the Arctic Council, which includes Russia, Norway, Sweden, all of the 8 Arctic nations, there's a really strong collaboration among all of those 8 Arctic nations to work together. The Arctic Climate Impact Assessment Report, the first one that really came out about what was happening in the Arctic, was a project of the Arctic Council, and all of the nations participated in that. The Arctic Human Development Report came from the Arctic Council. We're now looking at things like the sustainability in the Arctic. That's another report coming out. The Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment Report. All of these ones are coming from the Arctic Council and the collaboration with all of the 8 nations.
What's the Native Alaskan view of the Pebble gold development? Is it universal scorn, or is there mixed opinions?
It really is like everything else. You have people on one side and people on the other. And sort of the same way we feel about oil and gas development. You know, it's sort of the same thing. The Pebble Mine, for those of you who don't know, is one of the largest gold, copper mining structures that they've found in Alaska. It also happens to be located in the headwaters of the Bristol Bay fisheries, one of the largest fisheries in the world as well, and one that we are really reliant upon in our state. So there's a real diversity of opinion, even within the villages themselves, about Dynasty, who owns the Pebble Mine project, and it's employed a number of people that has given some real assistance to the villages. They have done some wise things. They hired one of the key leaders in the Native movement, who is now one of their spokespersons. So, you know, they've, and I actually have done some training with their board at Dynasty to help them to work more effectively in communities. My organization, we're really here to help educate, and we try not to take stands on issues because we're really about trying to get people to understand what's going on. So I'm not sure. I think if you ask if it came to a vote now, I don't think Pebble would go forward. I think that there's enough of issues, not only in the communities, but really statewide, because everyone in the state depends on those fisheries. That I don't think that it would. I don't think it would win. Don't think it's going to make it.
Does assistance come to you from individuals that hold a certain ideology that this is more from global warming that was facilitated by man, or do you see assistance coming to the Inuit people from a broad spectrum of individuals that hold both sides of the camp, whether it's global warming or just the natural progression of temperature?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question. We work with everyone who's willing to work with us. I guess that's the best way that I can say it. We don't always agree, and there certainly are global warming skeptics in every audience that I go to, every place that I go to, which is why I tend to not use the term global warming, because it's about climate change. Global warming is a small part of climate change, and people get so focused on that as being the issue that they forget about all of these other things that I just talked about. So it's not just about warming, because it is, in fact, it's warming in some places, it's cooling in other places. So it's climate change. That's really what the discussion needs to be around. And so we do work with all of those people, as long as we can work together effectively.
I'm just thinking, you know, there's different ways to relate to what you're saying. I mean, you're very vivid. But I think for myself, many people also probably, it's the conversations that I would have with my grandfather or my stepfather, is now very elderly, about the way of life that he came from, and the conflict about leaving what seems to be, in some ways, a healthier, more wholesome, you know, holistic type of life, even though it's not in a community like yours. Do you, as you talk to people and move around, do you see a commonality between what those of us who've never experienced Alaska's like, in terms of there's so many people leave the rural life to go to the cities, and they lose much of what their ancestors had. It sounds as if you work harder to keep what you had than many of us may in our families have.
There's a couple of ways that I'll answer that. One is that I know there are a lot of people who come to Indigenous communities really hungry to find something. And because we sort of have that feeling of knowing who we are and where we come from, my message to everyone is that they have their own culture. Some people may have forgotten it for a while, but that the important thing is that they get back to that and remember who they are and where they come from. And that's really what your culture is about, is where your ancestors came from, what your relationships are with them.
The other part of it is the process that you obviously go through of integrating where you came from with where you are.
Sure.
You may not like where you are, but you're where you are.
Well, the other thing about culture and traditional knowledge, for us in particular, traditional knowledge, people tend to think of it as being static, and it is not. Traditional knowledge is dynamic. Traditional knowledge, I learned from my mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, you know, and what I learned is going to be really different from what you pass on. So it's a compilation of the knowledge of the past with all of the knowledge of today and of the future. So those are the kinds of things. For us, I'll tell you, we have some of the same problems with a lot of our young people in particular who are moving into the cities from the villages, and that has become a problem of brain drain, like everybody else is seeing, people leaving their communities. But the places where they are really strong is where they still have their elders that have remained in the communities, and communities that are absolutely adamant about their desire to maintain their traditional way of life. One of the villages that we're working with now in our project is a small village called Igiagik. It's just a little over 100 people. They've said they don't ever want to have more than 150 people there ever. They want the kind of village where everybody knows everybody. They want the kind of life that they all rely upon one another to survive. And that's the choice. We have, and we have spent a long time in our communities remembering our culture. We are very strong in knowing languages, very strong in knowing our traditional dances, our traditional stories, in respecting the age and the wisdom of our elders, that those are values that we live every day of our life. As a matter of fact, if you go into any of our villages, the first thing you'll see is their traditional values up on the wall in their grocery store. Those values are everyday principles that we all live by. So, and that's the way we're taught. So I think that's what gives us that kind of inner strength to survive in the world we live in now.
My friend John Peterson flies a bush plane out of Fort Yukon. And he has a different concern. I'd like to hear your words on the subject. He says 80 years ago, all these people lived in moose hide huts or walrus hide huts and lived off the land subsistence style. They were active, happy, hardworking people. Today they live in houses constructed from materials from the South. They have huge generators that run 24 hours a day, producing electricity. Even in Fort Yukon now, you can use a cell phone. It's his belief that this separation from the land has been the major reason for alcohol, substance abuse, suicide, extreme early teenage pregnancy, 14-year-old girls, kids burning down the school because they didn't want to go to school anymore, just insanity, all right? So in your judgment, what do you think is a greater scourge on your people? Is it the influence of modern man and modern ways of living, or is it climate change?
I don't even know where to begin with that one. There's no question that we have issues, social and societal issues within our communities. We do have some of the highest rates of suicide, particularly with our young men. That has been a major issue in Alaska for quite some period of time. But I'll tell you why I, as the mom of a young man, think that's happened, and some of the things that we're trying to do to change that is that in our societies, in our world, the young men were the ones who were the hunters. They were the ones who provided for the family. That was their job. We've lost a whole lot of that in a lot of ways. Number one, a whole lot of our women are the ones who are being educated. They're leaving. They're going to bigger towns, getting an education, and not going back home. So we're seeing some of those problems that are really beginning to happen. We understand that because of climate change, because of some of these other impacts that are happening, we're having to go back to really look at those traditional ways of life that have sustained us, that have kept our cultures together over centuries of time, and to bring back the strengths that were part of those old ways and those old values. That means that our hunters now are beginning to have a higher status again, because they are the ones who are going to be having to provide for our communities off of the land again. Because you can't go out on your snow machine, you can't afford the gas or the airplane fare to go into any place else to the big city to buy what you need to buy. That we're going to have to begin to rely more upon our own resources. That's why we're looking at this self-reliance project as sort of being a model for us looking at how we recognize and use those tools that we've always had there. We, like everybody else, things changed a lot with the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. That made a really big difference in the politics and in the way that Alaska Native people fit into the state, for good and for bad. And that's another huge discussion that I can't get into because it's insane the way this was set up. But one of the good things that the Claims Settlement Act did is it gave the Native people of Alaska a lot of money and a lot of land. If you have money and you have land, you have power and influence. And that puts us in a little different position than most other indigenous communities across the world. We have the ability to control a lot of the politics. Some of our Native corporations now are the #1 employers in the state of Alaska. That we are the ones who have some of the multi-billion-dollar corporations that are doing the defense contracts for the rest of the world. So we come from a little different perspective. And I can understand your friend's ideas and opinions, because I see the same thing out there as well. I probably just see it from a different point of view, because I've lived both that real rural, remote life way, as well as having gone on and being educated, living on a broader stage. So I guess I see it from maybe just a little different angle, although I understand the frustration, feel it as well.
I think it's fair to say that you're involved in a lot of multinational organizations that try to bring Indigenous peoples together. So are there ever any worries that such a global emphasis will disperse responsibility to such an extent that nobody feels like they have to do anything personally?
Well, as I told you, that's one of the reasons that I came back to doing the self-reliance project, because I felt over the last few years that I was getting really pulled in so many directions that I had to ground myself. And so that's why I get back and do the things that I do when I start my discussion with you tonight. I remember to ground myself in who I am and where I come from. I try to keep my feet planted on the ground and know who I am. And I think that's the difference. I think more and more people are beginning to not only do those kinds of things, but to bring the people along with us who can do that as well. Normally, when I travel, I usually always try to bring a young person with me. That has normally been my instead of speakers fees that I normally get, I have the sponsoring organization, bring along one of my young students, because mentorship is a really important part of what I have to do too, and that's getting our young people trained so that they can carry those messages on.
Can you speak a bit about oil and gas? I see David Lawrence was on the Aspen Institute board with you, and I've spoken to him. I'm somewhat familiar with what they're doing. That's a very prominent effort. I'm sure there are others, but how does their effort, they have their goals and their motives, how does it work together with your interests or the interests of the people?
Well, obviously we have a lot of the oil and gas in Alaska. North Slope of Alaska is further up north, at Barrow, north from my hometown in Nome. There have been amazing, great opportunities and things that have come because of oil and gas development. We have infrastructure, we have schools, we have swimming pools, we have road systems, we have sewer and water projects in that city that would never have come without oil and gas development there. So you can see that there are some real positive experiences. Barrow also has the largest number of meth users in the state. Don't know that you're necessarily, you can make the inference however you want to see it, but there are some social problems that come along with people who have come from poverty, from abject poverty, to suddenly being able to buy a $70,000 truck. You know, and so there are a lot of those kinds of dynamics that are happening. I see the good and the bad that's happened. I have to tell you, there are some things that in our Native communities across the North we agree on, and some we don't. The one thing that we all agree upon is that most everyone in our communities is really against offshore drilling. Mostly, again, because our communities depend on those same critters to feed our villages. If we don't have whales, if we don't have walrus, if we don't have polar bear, if we don't have those animals that we need to sustain our way of life, then we have real concerns about that. There is, regardless of what Shell says, no way of cleaning, at least now, there's no technology that will clean an oil spill in ice-infested waters. There just isn't. Shell says that they're working on it, and I believe they are. I've had a few conversations with them. It doesn't exist yet. Not sure what it will do when it does exist. Some of the things that Shell has done in getting their permits for the Chukchi and Beaufort is that they have agreed now that they're going to limit some of their exploration time so that it doesn't interfere with the whale migration and our hunting seasons. So these are some of the things that we have been able to discuss and work out within our communities. So again, as I said, there's good and bad, just like everything else.
How many in the population, and what's the size of the territory? We're talking about 1 million acres, 10 million acres? Are we talking about 100,000 people, 2 million? How many? What's the balance?
The state of Alaska or the North Slope area?
The area that all this concern is.
Okay, that would, I guess, be the whole state of Alaska. If you put a map of Alaska over a picture of the continental United States, it stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So that's how big it is. It takes up almost the entire middle of the United States and stretches the southeast all the way to the Florida Keys and in the Aleutians all the way out to the Pacific. So it's massive. The North Slope area in particular is pretty large. Truthfully, I don't remember. I don't remember what the acreage is there, but it's huge. As I said, in Alaska at one time, you know, we used to have 3 time zones just in the state of Alaska. Does anybody know that? There used to be 3 time zones, yeah, just in the state of Alaska. So it gives you an idea, yeah.
Out the Aleutians, I've flown 4.
That's right, yeah, if you go further into Kamchatka area, you're right.
So I think one of really the most fascinating things, especially listening to your lecture and seeing the photographs and thinking about how people live in Alaska, is that, and I don't know if you have an observation about this that you could share with us, is that for those of us who live somewhere else, the image of what life in Alaska is like, even with all the television shows with the bush pilots flying from point A to point B and so forth, it really sounds like it's very different. And having a vice presidential candidate from Alaska, I think maybe has taken us more in the wrong direction in the country thinking about Alaska and its problems and its challenges. So could you just speak to that for 1 minute? I mean, when you travel to other places in the United States, do you find that people have no idea what happens in Alaska? How do you see that?
Let me first of all tell you that Sarah Palin is from Idaho. That's true. That is true. But that's always one of the first things people always say to me, so I just try to get that out of the way. And yes, I do know the ex-governor. She's hardly ever in Alaska anymore, so we don't see that much of her. Yeah, I think people still see Alaska as being very mysterious. And it's still, luckily, it's become quite a destination point for a lot of tourism. We've had more tourists there in the last 10 years than we've ever had before. And that's one of our industries that really is improving. We've got beautiful, beautiful glacier tours all across the state of Alaska. We've got some really gorgeous communities there. And we have everything from very beautiful cosmopolitan cities like Anchorage, where you can find the museum, you can find a ballet, you can find the opera, everything that you would find in a large city is in Anchorage, to a village of 25 people, where there is no sewer and water. You have your life living with a honey bucket. I had to explain at lunchtime what a honey bucket was. Everybody knows what a honey bucket is. When you don't have sewer and water, you have a bucket. And we have what they're called honey buckets. So people have to take their waste, their sewage, and dispose of it into hopefully a sewage lagoon that is usually not far from their community. So we have third world conditions right outside our doorstep. People laughingly say Anchorage, the only good thing about Anchorage is that it's just 20 minutes away from Alaska. And that in a way is true, because we're very close to a lot of what I call the real Alaska too, where people still live pretty much in conjunction, in concert with the land.
I will say that in protecting your shores, in dealing with oil companies, you've done far better than Texas, and I hope people in Texas will consult with you. I mean, Shell may be a questionable citizen, BP is a terrible citizen, and they're coming back.
Yeah, we have, again, as I said, there's a real love-hate relationship. The oil companies have done some great things. They've also provided some of the largest funding sources for many of our projects. You know, that they support a lot of indigenous issues. They give money to people who will take their money. I will tell you that, for instance, my board has decided that the Science Commission doesn't accept funds from oil companies.
Yeah. Well, they're both lovely citizens in their country of origin, but not in Texas or Alaska.
Yeah, so I can see that you have the same kind of relationship we do.
I think it's the lady over there.
Oh, no.
A couple of months back, we had the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs visited Houston, and he held a speech at the Petroleum Club about the High North, about the Arctic. And, well, a lot of the people who attended the speech there, well, he had to be careful with the words he used and everything, because some of the people there, they don't believe in global warming, and they're a bit skeptical to the whole deal. However, his speech was received in a very good manner. People spoke positively about it afterwards. Do you notice any change within the industry, especially the oil and gas industry, about how they think of perhaps the Arctic, of indigenous people?
Absolutely. I think that we've learned a lot in the many years that we've been working with the oil and gas industry. You know, we have some of the longest established relationships in Alaska and working with oil and gas people. We've also got some of the major aging infrastructure that comes from things like our aging pipeline is one of the big concerns. I didn't show you one of the pictures here, but that wildfire that I showed you burning in Alaska, on another one of my slides you can see the pipeline is right in front of that wildfire that was burning there. So we have some real concerns about the aging infrastructure and what's going to happen when all of the oil and gas runs out. We are worried about, for instance, the directional drilling that they're doing much more of now, where they leave a much smaller footprint on the land, and that is much better. We really appreciate that, but doing a lot more directional drilling, unfortunately, underneath some of our major waterways. And we are concerned about what happens, not necessarily now, but certainly with the aging of those lines and what they're going to do to make sure that we don't have problems with our water systems in the 7th generation or the 3rd generation or whatever.
Okay, so they take your concerns into their...
Well, yes, they truthfully, they have to. Our relationship has with many of the oil companies. Our biggest conversations come in court in the Ninth Circuit Court, and that's where we have a lot of our conversation. So we've learned that unless you want to go to that directly to that place, we do have a lot more local conversation that didn't used to happen before. One of the projects that my organization, the Science Commission, did for the first time ever is one of the oil companies asked us to do the social science plan for NPRB communities, National Petroleum Reserve communities in the Arctic. So it's the first time they've ever asked a Native organization to actually look at how this community should evolve from the perspective of the Indigenous community. So these are some signs that we see that things are improving in some ways.
I just want to say that I think your perspective on community self-reliance is very admirable and important, but I think you would agree that at the end of the day, you need outside resources and funding to achieve your goals, particularly with adaptation. Like you said, no one wants to sign a $20 million check. And I thought of the community of Kivalina, which I understand is suing oil companies as being responsible for climate change and thus the melting of permafrost and the dissolution of their communities, right? So I was curious if you had interaction with that community and if you thought litigation was an appropriate route for those types of economic resources, or in the future if you have others like channels to have that sort of
support. Yeah, Kivalina is one of the interesting activities that's going on, working with the Native American Rights Fund. I don't know if you're familiar with NARF. I guess the only thing we can say is we're waiting to see what's going to happen, and we don't know. It's one avenue that's open. I think what we're doing is exploring all of the various options that there are out there. But we recognize that federal funding is declining. We recognize that that we don't have people who are willing to assist in the larger scheme of things. We lost Senator Stevens, and I'll tell you this straight out that Ted Stevens was. I jokingly say we call the state of Alaska Ted. Because the place was really so strongly influenced by his ability to bring funding into the state of Alaska. We've lost a great deal of that, and you can really see that the political structure has changed in terms of federal funding now coming to the state of Alaska. So that's one of the real concerns and why we're trying to explore as many various options and alternatives as we can think of. I don't think there's anything that's off the books. I think we'll probably consider any avenue that seems like it might lead somewhere, including the national stage. And that's sort of what we're trying to do now, is to make this an issue that's not just an Arctic issue, but that people see as being a global issue as well.
I'm interested in your perspective in your worldwide work. Which nationalities seem to be the most proactive in doing something about the climate change, and which are the most resistant?
Well, we have really strong programs in our in some of the ones that I mentioned, in the small island states, some of those communities. Again, because there's a structure for them to be more politically active, to get their voices out there and heard. So that's one of the SIDS are some of the areas that are doing at least getting their voices out and being heard. There are really active players in our network from Africa, from the Philippines, from India, from Brazil. Those are probably, and then of course some of the American, the North American communities. Those are probably the ones that are in the strongest places right now. And I don't know if that's because they seem to have more of ability to get to the meetings, to have some funds available for them to travel and to participate.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then we have some quick visiting with Patricia, and then I'm afraid we need to go to our next destination.
Okay.
Well, one of the strongest leaders in that area has been President Nasheed of the Maldives. And the last time I heard about him, he was in some danger because of a military coup. I wonder if you could update us a little bit on that.
I don't know about that personally. I can't tell you about that.
And I do want to personally thank you for representing your culture and your people so clearly. And a reaction I have had is, you are us. That it doesn't take my Rice physics degree to understand if we keep pumping heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere, we're going to continue heating the planet. And Shishmaref is Galveston and eventually Houston. And I hope that maybe that can be part of your communication with people.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, and I usually do try to show some pictures about the local area. I'm sorry I didn't get around to doing that, but when I show pictures of Manhattan being underwater, people sort of get the idea that this isn't just about the Arctic, but but there are lots of places in this world. And to be honest with you, I'm more worried about you guys than I am about us, because we know how to survive on the land. So that's one of my other messages, is getting out to you all. We really ought to think about this.
Well,
Thank you very
I think
much.
that's a great way to end. I want to thank Patricia again for her time, and all of you for coming. Let me just mention that the Center for the Study of Environment at Rice is having another event on the Arctic on April 20th with Julian Strove. And that will be at Brockman Hall at 7:30 p.m. for those of you who are interested. You know, come to the Rice website; it'll be posted there. Our next event that's coming up at the Baker Institute is we're having Avery Lovins is speaking about his new book called Reinventing Fire, which is his formula for going 100% off fossil fuels. Well, I'll be interested to hear how he thinks we can do that, because it seems pretty hard from my vantage point. But anyway, we're looking forward to seeing him and hearing about his new book. Thank you very much, Patricia.
Was that New York
Yes,
presentation?
yes. I'm going to have to sit down and now think about it after we take Patricia out to dinner. Have to think